Welcome to Your Voice, a New Jersey public policy program of the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of New Jersey. UULMNJ is dedicated to providing a voice for justice, equality, and compassion, and raising the ethical and moral questions related to our state's social and legislative issues. This series of educational programs will explore important social issues facing New Jersey, including economic justice, mass incarceration, environmental sustainability, immigration, and many others. Today, we are exploring global climate change, a controversial issue that perhaps not enough people understand. What is it and why does it matter? Our guests are Jim Walsh. Jim is a dedicated political organizer with over 10 years of experience working in local and national movements to empower communities to work for social, environmental, and economic justice. Jim currently serves as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director for Food and Water Watch. In his capacity, Jim is overseeing and implementing a regional strategy to ensure the well-being of the public triumphs over private interests who profit from the exploitation of the essential resources of food and water. Jim's passion for social justice began while volunteering for Catholic workers while earning a degree in economics at Marquette University. He was an organizing fellow with the New Jersey Public Interest Research Group at Rutgers University, and he has also done organizing work with Family Promise, organizing communities of faith on issues of poverty and homelessness. Immediately prior to starting with Food and Water Watch, Jim was the program director of the New Jersey Citizen Action, where he oversaw statewide campaigns focused on a variety of social justice issues. Welcome, Jim. Our another guest is Jeff Tittel. Jeff has served as director of the New Jersey chapter of the Sierra Club for over 15 years. His environmental advocacy has significantly advanced the environmental protections of New Jersey. Just some of his legislative and regulatory lobbying accomplishments include passage of the California Car Bill, promotion and design of NJDEP's stormwater rules, and passage of the private well testing bill, among many, many others. Prior to directing the New Jersey chapter, Jeff founded numerous other grassroots environmental organizations in New Jersey, including the Highlands Coalition, and he still serves on many other boards, such as the Work Environment Council. Jeff Tittel receives tremendous recognition throughout New Jersey as an environmental leader. The Star-Ledger has named him one of the most top influential people in New Jersey. And our third guest is Ron Hein, attorney and chair of our UULMNJ Environmental Task Force. Ron also comes from an extensive organizing background. I'd like to thank you all for being here and helping us to understand global climate change. You know, there are people who still don't believe that climate change is that important. Maybe you could help us explain. And Jim, we'll start with you. From your view, what is climate change and why should we be concerned about it?
Sure. Well, climate change is essentially probably one of the single largest issues facing our society today, and where we're seeing shifts in temperature patterns and other things that are creating more opportunities for extreme weather events are probably the most direct things that people can see how this impacts us. How climate change is coming about is essentially we're seeing an increase in greenhouse gases, things like methane and carbon dioxide being put in the atmosphere. Essentially traps the sun's heat, and rather than that heat reflecting off the earth and going out into space, is actually trapped and held within our atmosphere. And this research has shown that this will increase the likelihood of extreme weather events, things like forest fires. What we've experienced recently, events like Hurricane Sandy, things like Hurricane Katrina. We can't necessarily peg any one of these incidences to climate change, but we're certainly seeing an increase of these events. Much has been reported. More directly, and we can see that the polar ice caps are melting and is creating a tremendous challenge for us to moving forward with climate change, and actually maybe exacerbating issues of climate change, where the ice caps, which tend to be white, would reflect more of the sun's energy out into space, or actually the ocean will absorb more of that heat in itself, and is starting a cycle which, if we don't act quickly, we may be unable to reverse. And so the action that's needed on climate change is really something that we can't wait along for much longer. And in terms of what we can do about it, I think that there are some really important steps that we can take policy-wise to address climate change. And one is really shifting our focus and energy right now. We've been very reliant on energy sources like coal and gas, natural gas, which many people know, for energy sources. These pollutants actually will emit, when you burn coal and methane, you actually emit CO2 in the atmosphere. And methane itself, the chief component of natural gas itself, is a greenhouse gas. And so in New Jersey, we've actually seen us moving in a direction that is actually could adversely impact our climate, where we're actually transitioning coal plants into gas-fired power plants, which we've seen that these gas plants will actually have lower CO2 emissions than coal-fired power plants. But we're also seeing that the methane that would be powering these gas plants is actually leaking out of pipes and compressor stations in various places along the way, which is actually creating a greater heat warming effect, because methane actually has more heat trapping capacity than CO2 does in our environment. And so where we are now building pipelines across many of our communities, and Princeton here is one of them. It's been a victim of a plan to build a natural gas pipeline through it. There's plans to build a pipeline that would be carrying oil that has been fracked in the Dakotas through a pipeline from Albany to Linden called the Pilgrim Pipeline. These are all steps that are moving us in the wrong direction. And we need to start turning the tide and start moving away from those energy sources to actually start investing in renewable energy sources, to start taking steps to develop our solar and wind capacity and potentially explore other renewable options that we haven't seen before. We'd like to see a Manhattan-style project to addressing climate change, where we actually are spending tremendous public resources on actually addressing this. And we think that putting those resources forward is probably one of the most important things we could be spending money on right now. We also think that another important step is conservation. Conservation is probably one of the steps that people can individually take themselves to reduce energy usage on their own. But we also have policies that could be implemented to actually to help people reduce their carbon footprint and actually reduce those emissions that we're putting into the environment through leaving our lights on, or the types of light bulbs we're using, or the types of transportation choices that we have in front of us. And with transportation choices, we unfortunately have folks like T. Boone Pickens are partnering with legislators to promote legislation that would increase natural gas vehicles on our roadways. This is another thing where we're not moving away from these polluting fossil fuels, but really moving away from coal and plugging ourselves into another fossil fuel source, which will continue to warm our planet and put more emissions out into our environments. And so I think that what we need right now is for policymakers to stop moving us in this direction of more use of fossil fuels and start moving us off of these fossil fuels. In a nutshell, we can actually create a more sustainable climate for ourselves and future generations.
Great, thank you. And Jeff, what to you is climate change, and why do you think we should be important? Do you have more to add or agree with?
Well, after that, I'll just say that climate change is real. It's happening. We're seeing the effects every day. What's happening to our planet is really the struggle for survival. The planet will survive. It's the species that live on it. What will happen to them? We see climate disruption on a daily basis, whether it's in Bangladesh or whether it's here in New Jersey. We see in a state like New Jersey, things like the southern pine beetle that used to die every winter, now attacking our forests and the pinelands. We see storm drains on Long Beach Island that were built above the high tide, now having fish live in them. You know, one day when the giants play the dolphins in the Meadowlands, they're going to be real dolphins, because that's part of the state that's going to go underwater. 9% of New Jersey is at risk currently to sea level rise. The largest increase in sea level rise almost anywhere in the world has been in the mid-Atlantic region, and we're seeing towns down in the Delaware Bay Shore actually go underwater. Every time there's a full moon and a high tide, we see roads go underwater that were built above it. So we're seeing it happen. It's real. Anyone who denies climate change is denying reality or being paid for by the oil and gas industry and the coal industry. And so we have a real challenge ahead of us. We can do it. We have the tools now. The question is, do we have the political will and political leadership to get it done? Our governor denies climate change. He pulled us out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. He closed the Office of Climate Change. He ended the work that was being done in the DEP on climate adaptation and mitigation. New Jersey was a leader. We were going to be the first state in the nation to have offshore wind. He's failed to go forward with any rules and regulations doing it. He crashed our solar market, and we had to resuscitate it. But we have the tools. We can make a difference, but you have to have the political will to do it, or you have to have political leaders that are not more concerned about what the Koch brothers and the Tea Party thinks and what's best for the state and best for their economy. 5 years ago, we had 10,000 jobs in the solar field. Now we have 6,500. So there are impacts directly, as well as the loss of jobs. It's also been the loss of being able to reduce greenhouse gases and other pollutants. So for every ton of carbon we reduce 2/3 of a ton of nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide and mercury and everything else. So we have a real challenge ahead of us, but we also have the tools to do it. We need the political will, and we need the independence. The legislature has done some good things over the years, but we have a lot more that we need to do.
Okay. I know, Ron, you come at this from a slightly different angle. What is your view of climate change and why it's
Well,
important?
Jim really laid out the case here. This is probably the most pervasive issue that faces our species today. We've really had our head in the sand about this for a long time. The problem is political will, but it's not only just political will, it's economic decisions that are being made. I think that people need to understand that all of this stuff is interconnected together. We don't live in silos all by ourselves. We make these decisions in one area of our lives, and it affects others. If the political and economic interests of the world, specifically in the United States and here in New Jersey, don't start taking into consideration the interconnectedness, then we're going to just make this problem worse as we go forward. Back in the 60s, we had a consciousness raising where we said that, pollution and air pollution was an issue that we needed to be working on. And we made major strides in those areas. The smog in the major cities in the country today is not nearly what it was back in the 60s. We need the same kind of political will and economic will also to see that we go forward on trying to do some things differently than what we have in the past.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, we talk about climate change. We talked a little bit about New Jersey, but climate change has always been happening.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it different now?
Well, it's very simple, and I'll just use it this way. We had, between Hurricane Irene and being followed by a tropical storm Lee, was considered a millennium event by the New Jersey climatologist. A year later, we had Superstorm Sandy, followed by a nor'easter, which is also considered a millennial event. We've had 2 millennial events in this decade, and we're not even halfway through it. We have seen, 8 out of the 10 warmest years in the last decade. But we're also seeing the damage. $30 billion from Sandy, $10 billion from Irene, and that's just New Jersey. We're seeing it across the country where damage from climate impacts are having a bigger toll, not only on the environment and on people, but also on us financially, whether it's all these forest fires we're having in the West that happen now year-round, not just during the dry seasons. We're seeing big disruption. New Jersey is the warmest place in the world that can still grow cranberries. we're going to see those changes, and they're coming, and so it's here, and so we need to do things about it and really be aggressive because, unfortunately, we've only got one state and one planet and one place to live, and it's really under risk right now.
The preponderance of the scientists have all said that this is something that's real, that this is man-made. I mean, you go back 200 years ago, we started with coal and peat being burned, and then we moved to oil and natural gas. It's just the amount of pollution that's being spewed into the atmosphere just keeps getting larger and larger. And we're seeing real results. If this were a 60-40 kind of split among the scientists, then we could have a real debate. But when we're talking about 95, 98% of real scientists looking at these issues, this is something that is not just made up. This is not just a bunch of tree huggers that's out there. This is real life stuff that's happening. As Jeff was saying, the fact that these events are happening closer and closer together, that we can actually measure, that the polar ice caps are melting, that we can measure that the ice shelf in Greenland is disappearing today and is not going to be coming back. We see the calving of huge icebergs off of Antarctica. These things are just not random effects. These things are real. And we've got to do something about it. We can do something about it. That's the thing. It's taken 200 years for these things to build up to really a tipping point, a real close to a tipping point. And we can't expect real results to turn back the clock within the next decade. But we do need to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, enough is enough. We need to take action now. We need to take bold action, because without that, things are just going to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, to your question about, why is this different? We are dramatically speeding up the change in climate. And where, what used to take tens of thousands of years is taking a matter of centuries and decades now. And the impacts are actually speeding up faster now than scientists even thought they would be happening with models that were developed 10 years ago. And so this is something that is very different than, the regular cycles of climate change that have happened on the planet for, over the span of, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. We're seeing, communities of people, entire civilizations right now about to be wiped off the map in the South Pacific because their islands are being captured by rising sea levels. These are people who, basically lived in peace and harmony on their, small little islands in the Pacific are now, in danger of being entirely obliterated because of climate change. So this is, an issue that impacts us from, the smallest indigenous communities in the Pacific to, as Jeff said, people are now seeing roadways underwater here in New Jersey. And so, I think that this is something that, we weren't seeing happen when my parents were kids, to the extent it's happening now. And I can't imagine what my daughter is going to see when she's, my age, if we don't take action now to make sure that her future and the future of other children like her isn't left to the whim of fossil fuel industry, who could essentially care less about what we're doing to the planet right now. They're making tremendous amounts of money off of burning coal, burning gas, burning oil, and it's to the detriment of all of us.
And I think people forget that the human species is one that can also become extinct if we're not careful. And I think that long-term what can happen.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to move in, though, because I hear you talking a lot about political will. And if we had the political will, what kind of legislation or what kind of things can we be pushing through?
Well, I think, first of all,
changes?
New Jersey has been, up until this administration, in the forefront. When Governor Cody put in 2005, 22.5% of our energy coming from renewable sources by 2020. That was landmark. When we passed the California emissions bill, in 2004 to tie us to having clean energy standards and zero-emission vehicles. And I helped work and author the Global Warming Response Act that set a goal of 80% reduction by 2050 for greenhouse gases. So we've set things up. We had a great Office of Climate Change. We were part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We were reducing carbon. The Christie administration comes in, and the governor is more concerned about his national politics, and he guts all of those things. So we have a lot of tools we can use right now. We could be building a lot more. We could be building wind off our coast. We could be doing a lot more solar. So we can do a lot under the tools we have. What we need to do, though, to move us forward is that we're supporting, legislation that is a Sierra Club national priority to have 80% renewable by 2050 and a 30% reduction in energy efficiency of energy use by 2030, because we know that we have the ability to do it. For energy efficiency is the most underrated form of saving us from pollution and saving us money. For every dollar we spend in energy efficiency, as a homeowner, we get 4 back. Every business gets 16 back. Just something simple as LED lights. If you turn off, because I think when we look at solutions, there's individuals, there's local government, there's state government, there's national, and there's international. Do you realize that if you turn off your 3 televisions and the 3 TV, your cable boxes, and the light on your microwave, that's 20% of your electric bill right there that you could save, and how much power that saves. The average house in this state, the investment of about $10,000 in better furnaces and appliances and better insulation and windows could cut their energy use by almost half. So that's one area we can do a lot in. Smart grid, moving electricity around better. Distributed generation, so instead of building big expensive power plants, we can build small solar and wind and micro, have large wind farms off our coast and redundancy. We can get there. We have the technology. We just need to move things forward, and I think we can do that.
So what you're saying is the individual can have a lot of impact on this. It doesn't have to be just
It's
legislation.
everything, yes, because we have to make that, the individual needs to force government to change, but it also can force society to change. And when, kids look at somebody in an SUV and go, no, and I see that all the time, and they want to drive a Tesla or a Prius, yeah, we're changing. People want to go green. Everybody on a daily basis going to the local farmer's market and buying local produce, buying green products like green cleansers, walking instead of driving, we're doing it. A lot of people are. But we need to do a lot more, and we need to get government to act as well. And a lot of towns are doing good things. Princeton, where we are, has got a good green committee, and they're doing things. But we also need to do a lot more, and we can get there. But we need to all, work at the different levels.
Do either of you have some thoughts about that?
I think that one of the policies, I think about one of the best policies that I've seen brought forward in terms of renewable energy is when through the LIHEAP program, the Low Income Heating and Energy Efficiency Program, the federal government dedicated tremendous amounts of resources to helping low-income people weatherize their homes. By doing this, you're taking a dynamic where someone who doesn't have the means to insulate their windows, or maybe their landlord doesn't care about insulating their windows, to actually create insulation there so that when that person turns on their heat, they're actually by de facto reducing their energy bills and reducing our climate footprint. I think expanding that program to increase incentives for homeowners across the board would be really helpful. When you look at programs like that, they not only, with the LIHEAP program, you're not only creating a dynamic where the low-income homeowner is paying less an energy bill, but that's creating jobs in those communities where people are actually going out and doing the weatherization. And so these are ways that we can actually create jobs and move forward with things. I think that one thing that could be done is looking right now, we've recently had the governor veto legislation that would prohibit fracking waste from being dumped in the state. And we've seen the just kind of development of the natural gas industry is just run ramshot over communities over the last 10 years, and they've increased production, and so whereas the dumping of waste itself isn't going to essentially that itself doesn't create climate change, the industry and creating the infrastructure for that industry to function is a major concern. concern. And we've, essentially are, not only allowing that industry to continue to develop these climate polluting toxins, but also then threatening our drinking water and public health by accepting that waste into the state. And so I think that it's really a combination of moving into areas of conservation, renewable energy, and moving away from these dirty fossil fuels.
I just want to add that New Jersey, the Governor Christie's taken $1 billion from the Clean Energy Fund in 4 years that was supposed to go to those kinds of programs. We don't need we have a state program, it's been robbed.
Two other things which are important. Senator Bob Smith has convened a group of stakeholders, and I think that this is very important, that it goes across the whole gamut of people who are interested in seeing some reform done. And there's going to be some legislation that's going to be introduced in the fall that talks a lot about having sustainable energy, the goals that Jeff was talking about, having conservation, and doing a whole number of other things. Groups need to get behind these kinds of legislations because this is trying to partner with all of the different stakeholders, whether it's public service, whether it's the advocate's office, whether it's rate council, whether it's the environmental groups. That's the kind of thing that we could see significant action being taken place. In addition to that, we need to have a groundswell of support for people recognizing the fact that this climate change is taking place. This September on the 21st in New York, there's going to be a large rally that's going to be held, a people's rally, a march for global climate change, and we encourage people to participate in it. Talk to your local Sierra Club,
Yes,
talk to your local Unitarian church about participation in this. We need to stand up and be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think we're running out of time. One of the things that we really encourage the people who are viewing this program realize that we can't cover it all in a half-hour segment, but we encourage people to really educate themselves. And of course, one of the two places that they can go is the Sierra Club and to Food and Water Watch. And I encourage everybody to do that. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. I really appreciate the really educational information that was presented tonight. I think it was very informative for anybody who's listening. And you are all really great champions of the environment. And thank you for all of your work. It's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. These programs are a service of the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of New Jersey. UULMNJ is a nonprofit, faith-based organization supported by UU congregations throughout New Jersey. For more information on this program and others advocacy programs that we do, please go to www.UULMNJ.org. Thank you all.
Thank you.